Hello, fantastic Year 10 students, and welcome to the first whole class feedback we're doing on the work that's been set for you to do whilst we're all not in the classroom. So, as well as the overall Year 10 work that's been set by Miss Waller, we're now going to start to move to more of our individual classwork. So what I wanted you to look at was a Paper 1 Question 5. So this homework was set to be completed last Thursday. At the time of marking, 8 people had done it, so we need to get on top of that and making sure we're all doing this. I appreciate there's lots of issues with time at the moment, but it's really important to keep this work going so we keep moving things forward. Why this kind of work in particular? Well, if we look at it, Paper 1 Question 5 is worth 50% of Paper 1, 25% of the whole language GCSE. So it's really important to develop our work and ideas around this, and that's why I set it from a 2016 specimen paper. So again, there's a reliable provenance. I'm not just making up this question. It's one that's been created by the exam board for the development of pupils. So to remind ourselves of the question itself, here you've got a wonderful image of a stormy sea and the classic sort of writer description of a stormy sea as suggested by this picture. Remember, the key word here is always suggested as opposed to writer description of this picture. Sometimes I think there's a bit of disconnect between students thinking about that, and the word suggested gives you a really, really massive range of ideas that you could discuss. So for example, this is the sort of thing where certain very able pupils might write a perspective of a stormy sea from the viewpoint of the rock as opposed to a person, and I think it's that kind of developmental thinking that we want to encourage. The other one, write a story that begins with a sentence, "This is going to be a terrible day, one of those days when it's best to stay in bed because everything is going to turn out bad." Again, it begins with, isn't it? So the range of different areas you can go in that really does give you massive variety. And again, let's be innovative and interesting in the kind of work we did. 60% of you did the image question. That's about the usual frequency nationally. Most people tend to do the image question. I think physically because it's just more distinctive, isn't it? When you open the exam paper, you've been looking at a text for the entirety of the rest of Paper 1, all of Section A, and then you have this kind of image, and I think the brain just naturally turns to it. But again, all of the pieces people produced were very interesting. So I've called this section Pupil Exemplars, and I think this is because the students who've submitted work, I think they're really, really excellent pieces. Really, really interesting. The punctuation, grammar and spelling was impeccable, so there's no work in terms of dirt that I want to do around that at this point. I'd just like to pull out some of the different things that people wrote and talked about. So Louis, he used a really nice structure of using the word blue to start each of the first 3 paragraphs. And then there's this really strong, almost mythological element to his writing. Earlier on in his piece he used the word the Kraken, which is a mythological sea creature. Here he talks about the Storm King, bolts of flaming energy, slashes of ice-cold water. So these are very, very powerful terms. I like knotted whip here. And it's this kind of little detail that's important because, you know, knotted whips were a typical part of, maritime discipline on ships. And therefore it gives it that kind of, old style, almost ancient quality to it. And then that's linked into this phrase, the howling wind. The word whipping comes back as well. So the metaphor simile rather in this case, is sustained really nicely. Looking across here to Amelia's. So, anterograde amnesia. I haven't been able to form new memories since the 14th of November. So, in her piece you had this terrific specificity of what was happening. And, after this very long paragraph of detailed information here, this very concise, powerful short sentence linking in with what the reader is engaging with. After all this, I guess all I can do is write it down. Again, that's a terrific piece of writing, and again, because of the character's amnesia, you can question the reliability of everything they're doing, so that worked really well. Going to Sorrel, we talk about how colours delight the eye, so she reverses that with this haze of grey, white and black. Again, the talk about the forms, the very edges of nature look broken, so the idea of the storm being so powerful that the framework of the world is being torn to pieces. And again, there's the imagery of, things that are hard, things that are sharp, hard and rough, nothing smooth, broken, jagged, jutted, power, hardest. This kind of emphatic writing is great. Emma wrote a really strong dystopian piece, and I think slightly inspired by the current climate and the the traditional presentation of viral infection in science fiction horror literature is often equated with zombies and very threatening figures. What was really effective about this piece of writing, and there's lots of other good stuff in there, but I really like this, I picked this bit out, is when Emma's character went outside, she confronts a terrifying old lady, again, which is a convention of the horror genre. And this phrase, they'll come for you, they crave your health. So the word crave is very evocative. And again, your health, as opposed to, say, your blood or your flesh, it's just something slightly different. And what's really lovely is she anchors this very much in reality. So you have this kind of terrifying, ancient old lady on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's contrasted with the Aldi car park, which is a lovely switch. Dan, and I know Emma and Dan will be pleased that I've placed them together, a wonderful brother and sister team here. Dan created a very powerful work about a man in a cabin waiting for a storm to finish. And again, this sense of the timelessness of the storm, its endless nature, was really well evoked by his writing. He cooked up his own storm, is a phrase I particularly liked. He ate in silence, the characters by then. Again, like Louis, there's this old-fashioned style applied to the writing, so you get a sense that this is a character outside of the modern era of the internet and connectivity. They are very much on their own in the face of nature, and that was really strongly written. Aaliyah's writing, very, very rich in imagery and metaphorical, and until the very end of the piece, you don't get the identification of character, so that works really, really well. And the idea of the images here, the merciless wandering waves, a dance after dance, juvenile amusements. And then here we look at this sort of three-part section here, the future, the stars and the world. So we start off with a completely abstract concept, then we come to something that is physical but very distant before we zoom back in on the world and the place that we ourselves occupy. Hannah was writing a story about grief, which tied in with this idea of a terrible day. And again, there was a very real sense to her writing, what I think is well evoked here. This phrase, the overly sympathetic teachers who constantly check in on you, and I know I've been in that position as a teacher before when, pupils are worried or concerned about things, and you try too hard to sympathise or empathise with someone, and actually that's counterproductive. So I think that's very incisive and aware and emotionally intelligent writing. And then finally, Isabel, the repetition here, patches of white, patches of promise, just the phrasing, bleeding through the conquering bleak terrain, unforgiving waves swallowing the rocks. Look at the way the metaphorical and the imagery is continued swallowing goes into ravenous, rumbling that develops into quakes. These sounds now become more specific, rumbling and quakes. It's beautifully constructed writing throughout and really, really impressive. So those were very strong things in those pieces of writing. Now, for your dirt task, I'd like students to email back their responses, having made these amendments to your work. First of all, highlight the following: different kinds of word classes. So this isn't about just writing the word noun endlessly, but just thinking, okay, what kind of nouns have I used? What kind of adverbials have I used? What kind of verbs? Are they impactful? Are they powerful? Are they the best version of these? How have I used pronouns? So 2 or 3 people use pronoun I or the third person pronoun he with such great frequency, it started to interrupt their writing a little bit. With metaphors, similes and other language devices, how well have you used these? How effective are they? Could they be stronger? Could they be slightly changed to be more suitable for the kind of writing you're doing? Therefore, from this you should be able to work out how frequently or infrequently you're performing certain types of writing. So are you using too many similes, for example? And then give yourself a specific what went well. Let me just correct the spelling there. And EBI on your work. And again, you've done this kind of work before, so I'm not going to give a modelled example here. I'm going to use the models you send me as kind of good practice for the rest of the term. But don't just say, you need to do more of this or you need to do less of this. But let's be specific. Think about your paragraphing, your writing style, the organisation of your writing, your content. Is it even as interesting as you'd like to write it, or actually when you read it again, are you engaged by it, or are other people engaged by it? This is a great opportunity to get your family members to read your work. Do they find it boring? Do they find it interesting? Let's have these kind of honest appraisals of our own writing. So 2 things from this to further complete. If you've yet to complete the question, I think it's really important you do this. First of all, just getting yourself into good habits of work at home. Secondly, because as I indicated in the first slide, it has such a substantial connection to your exam. And then finally, If you have completed it already, a 100-word piece using the storm as a meta for an emotional state as opposed to a literal one. Because again, the exam board image is this idea of something which is suggested, and in a lot of the examiner's reports they talk about the wonderful different routes that pupils go down by very much using that word suggested as opposed to saying writing about the picture. So whether you did the picture or that this has been a terrible day, I'd like you to have a go at this. The reason I'm saying 100 words is to be concise and precise and elegant with our writing rather than overly long and diffuse. Again, you know, if a few words either way, that doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be exactly 100 words, but that's just to give you a bit of guidance and some thinking around that. I'll put all of this on Go for Schools, and I'd like the feedback work completed by the end of the week. So that will be 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th. So the 27th of March, please, for this update. Hope everyone is safe and well. Missing, you know, working with you in the classroom, such a brilliant group of young people to work with. And myself, Marlo, and my wife, I'm sure you'll all be pleased to know, are currently well, and everyone's okay. So look after yourselves and your families, and we'll be very much in touch through some sort of digital medium. Okay, take care, ladies and gents. Bye.